Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, so today we are jumping into a really profound clash. We're talking about the concept of God versus atheism.
Right, which is, a massive topic.
It really is. We're going to explore how ancient scribes literally edited the Bible to solve the problem of evil and sort of protect God's reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll look at how thousands of years later, modern atheists and skeptics have reclaimed the ultimate symbol of evil, Satan, as a mascot for humanism, free thought, and rebellion against divine authority.
It's a huge, fascinating shift in how we view morality.
Absolutely. And real quick, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button.
Yes, definitely do that.
So to get into this, we are looking at two really interesting sources. We've got a historical breakdown by Nils Glenn on the evolution of Satan in the biblical text.
Which is incredibly detailed, yeah.
Yeah, and we're pairing that with this really intense Jubilee panel discussion. It featured devout believers, so Christians, Muslims, Hindus, facing off against atheistic Satanists.
Right. And our goal here isn't to, declare a winner. We just want to impartially unpack how humanity has wrestled with these ideas of purpose and good and evil over millennia.
Exactly. But to really understand this modern debate, we have to look at the historical texts first.
Right. We do. We have to rewind quite a bit.
Like, how did this concept of an ultimate bad guy even evolve if God is supposed to be all-powerful?
Well, that's the thing. If you go back to the original Hebrew Bible, Satan actually wasn't a name.
Wait, really? It wasn't a name?
No, it wasn't a proper noun at all. It was basically a job title.
A job title? like a cosmic bureaucrat or something?
Pretty much, yeah. It translates to the adversary or the accuser.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if you look at the book of Job, this figure is actually working for God. He's like a heavenly prosecutor on the divine council.
So he's not an evil rebel at this point.
Yeah.
He's literally on the payroll.
Exactly. His job is to just observe humans and challenge their righteousness. But the theology completely fractures later on because of a massive historical crisis.
Right, the Babylonian exile.
Yes. Around 586 BCE, the Babylonians destroy Jerusalem, they destroy the temple, and they deport the Jewish people.
Which, you have to imagine the sheer psychological trauma of that.
It was devastating, and it forced this theological crisis called theodicy. It's the classic problem of evil.
Like, if God is perfectly good and all-powerful, why did our entire civilization just get wiped out?
Exactly, because before the exile, the text was actually very clear that God caused everything, good and bad.
Right, there's that verse in Isaiah, right?
Yes, Isaiah 45:7. It basically says, God creates light and darkness, God brings prosperity and creates disaster.
God authored the suffering.
Right. But after the trauma of the exile, scribes just couldn't reconcile that anymore. They couldn't handle the idea that their perfectly loving God authored this horrific destruction.
So they needed to fix it, which leads to this absolutely wild textual comparison in our sources.
Oh, the census story. Yeah.
It is the exact same event written twice in the Bible. King David taking a census, which was a sin, and a plague happens.
Right.
So in the book of 2 Samuel, which is older, who causes it?
The text says God was angry and God incited David to take the census.
Right, so God forces the sin and then punishes the people for it.
Which is super confusing and uncomfortable. But then, if you look at 1 Chronicles, which was written centuries later, after the exile,
They literally change the text.
they do. They tell the identical story, but they swap out the instigator. In Chronicles, it says Satan stood up against Israel and incited David.
It is so wild to me. It's like a literal historical PR campaign.
It really is, yeah.
The scribes needed a fall guy, They had to protect God's brand, so
Yeah.
he remains purely good.
Exactly. And that is, linguistically, the first time Satan becomes a proper name. The adversary becomes an independent evil entity.
Which makes me want to ask you, the listener, think about it. When you face some unfair hardship, do you instinctively look for a bad guy to blame just to keep your worldview intact?
It's a very human reaction. We want someone to blame.
We really do.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is how this ancient invention of a fall guy completely triggers modern atheism today.
Oh, entirely. The Jubilee panel is a perfect example of this. You have people looking at the exact same texts and arriving at totally different conclusions.
Yeah, let's talk about that panel, because you have these devout believers like Sean, the Christian pastor, and Amar, the Muslim panelist.
Right, and to them, God is the ultimate source of grace, high purpose, and divine justice.
But then across from them are these Satanists.
Yeah.
And we should clarify, right? They don't actually worship a literal red guy with a pitchfork.
No. Panelists like Lois, Jason, and Richard Lale, they clarify right away that they are actually atheists and secular humanists.
Right, skeptics.
Exactly. They just use Satan as a literary symbol for free thought and rebellion against what they see as a tyrannical Abrahamic God.
Tyrannical is a strong word, but when they talk about hell, you really see their point.
Yeah, the debate over hell was intense.
The Satanists point out that the idea of a deity burning people eternally, just for the crime of non-belief or skepticism, is incredibly cruel.
They argue that a being who demands absolute worship under the threat of infinite torture isn't worthy of worship.
Right. Feels like a cosmic dictatorship to them. And that total clash of worldviews really comes out when they talk about the Garden of Eden story in Genesis 3.
Oh, that was a fascinating part of the panel.
Right. Because believers look at Genesis 3 and see a tragedy. God gave humans this paradise of love, and we've ruined it with disobedience.
But the atheistic Satanists read the exact same story and see it completely differently.
How do they see it?
They argue that God actually wanted to keep humans ignorant, keeping them away from the tree of knowledge.
Ah, right. So the serpent is actually the good guy.
Yes, in their view, the serpent was the first advocate for equal rights. He's the one who woke humanity up and told them to seek knowledge.
Wow. Okay, I hear that humanist perspective, and it is a cool literary flip. But I've got to push back a little here.
Okay, what's your thought?
Well, if you completely discard this higher God-given purpose, doesn't humanity just end up totally adrift?
That is exactly what the believers on the panel asked.
Right. I mean, if life is just about making your own rules and taking care of yourself, doesn't that just lead to total selfishness?
Well, the atheists on the panel pushed back hard on that. They argued that meaning absolutely does not have to be prescribed from above.
So how did they find purpose?
Through localized meaning. Taking care of yourself and your immediate community is a profound purpose in itself.
Just basic human empathy.
Exactly. You don't need a divine overseer threatening you with hell to be a good neighbor. You do it because human flourishing requires community.
That makes sense. But it really begs the question about how we define good and evil without that divine rule book.
Which brings us to the legacy of religion itself.
Oh man, they went hard on this in the panel. The atheists pointed out all the historical harms.
Yeah, the Crusades, the witch trials, the suppression of science.
Right. But then the believers countered by pointing to the immense good religion has done.
True. Things like charity, the creation of hospitals, beautiful art, building resilient communities.
Both sides have the receipts, basically. But the atheistic perspective on daily morality is interesting. They say goodness isn't about obeying ancient rules, it's about active microactions.
Empathy, self-responsibility, just treating people well in the moment.
Right. But it's funny, speaking of ancient rules and, like, the legacy of religion, you mentioned something earlier about the image of Satan that is just mind-blowing.
Oh, the visual history. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Because the panel is arguing over this figure, but the actual image we have of Satan, the red skin, the horns, the pitchfork, none of that is actually in the Bible, right?
None of it. It is nowhere in the text.
So where did it come from?
It was essentially stolen by the early church from Greek and Roman pagan gods.
Like, they just copy-pasted the local god.
Pretty much. They looked at Pan, the Greek god of nature, who had goat legs and horns. And they looked at Hades, the god of the underworld, who carried a pitchfork-like weapon.
Wow. So they just merged them together to make the ultimate bad guy.
Yes. It was a deliberate strategy. They popularized this terrifying imagery, especially later with Dante's Inferno, to scare medieval peasants.
Scare them away from paganism and into the church.
Exactly. It was highly effective visual propaganda.
That is just wild. And it really makes me wonder if our visual image of ultimate evil is literally just medieval propaganda.
Right.
And if our concept of God's rules is being debated so fiercely right now between believers and atheists, is morality truly objective at all? Or is it just this constantly evolving human contract?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I want you, the listener, to think about this right now. Does your moral compass point true because you believe there's an external divine rule book telling you what to do?
Or does it point true just because of your own internal empathy?
Right. It completely changes how you view your own actions.
It really does.
So just to kind of bring this all together, we have gone on quite a journey today.
A massive journey, thousands of years.
Yeah. We started with these ancient scribes who literally externalized evil to protect their concept of a good God.
Right, creating the adversary to take the blame.
And then we followed that all the way to modern atheists today,
Yeah.
who reject that God entirely and embrace that very adversary as a symbol of free thought and humanism.
It shows that this debate isn't just about parsing ancient texts.
No, not at all. It's really about who we are, and ultimately, who is responsible for our actions.
Absolutely. Which actually leaves me with a thought I really want people to ponder after this.
Okay, lay it on us.
Well, if the concept of Satan evolved over centuries just to answer the question of why bad things happen,
Yeah.
and then modern atheism evolved to question why a good God would allow it in the first place,
Yeah.
what completely new concepts, symbols, or stories will humanity invent in the next 1,000 years to explain the darkness and the light within ourselves?
Oh, wow. That is a deep question to end on. I love that.
Something to think about.
Definitely. Well, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.